Fans of the Horus Heresy, thank you very much for joining me for my latest video in a series reviewing the different Space Marine armour marks made by Forge World. And today we're looking at Mark IV or Maximus Armour. Now, what we have here is not quite a tactical squad, this is a tactical support squad, but I thought I'll keep the marks going in order to preserve the sort of storyline narrative rather than doing marks 5 and 6 as tactical squads and then coming back to 4. So let's look at Mark IV armour. Mark IV Maximus Armour represents a significant redesign of basic Space Marine powered armour, and this fits in the narrative line of the story that as the Great Crusade got into its second half, let's say, great amounts of technology had been recovered and assimilated back to the Martian forgers. And this technology allowed the earlier Space Marine power armour, so predominantly Mark II armour, to be radically redesigned and much simplified to reduce materials cost, weight, and generally just make a more efficient suit. And this is what Mark IV represents. We move away from an armour which has got very complicated multiple plates on each section of the body to something that's much simpler and cleaner and much more akin to later marks of Space Marine armour. So let's have a quick look at one of these guys. There's 3 different kits from Forge World here. There's a set of Mark IV armour from Armour Through the Ages. This is a currently available kit, so that's got the redesigned hands and weapons. We have a set of Rotor Cannons, which all these guys are armed with, and then I've also used Mark IV Iron Hand Legion icon shoulder pads. So let's take a look at this armour. So the thing that strikes you about Mark IV armour is it has a very clean, simple lines, and it's far less bulky than Mark II or Mark III armour. Far less bulky, and arguably it's the slimmest looking of all the Space Marine power armours. I mean, even more so than Mark VI and Mark VII that were to come later. And clearly it has a more streamlined look to it than the somewhat stopgap Mark V armour. So what are the characteristics? So as I said, so basically the Great Crusade had assimilated lots of lost technology, and this allowed the Techpriests of Mars to redesign the power armour suits, and Mark IV was able to have much more sophisticated joints, which allowed the use of larger armour plates as a consequence. So the whole suit became much simpler with these large sections of armour, and it's described as being much easier to repair than the preceding Mark II, Mark III suit. And as the Horus Heresy began, large numbers of these suits of armour had been shipped out to the legions, and some legions are described as being fully re-equipped with the armour, whereas other legions were partially re-equipped. So this is almost, in some ways, this is the mark of armour that is synonymous with the Horus Heresy, and certain legions, I mean particularly, say the World Eaters and the Emperor's Children, this armour features very prominently in, and it is quite signature to them. These Forge World models look really good for Mark IV, and if you want an armour mark that looks the most upright and slimmest proportioned Space Marine armour mark, well, Mark IV is the one to go for. It's got a completely redesigned helmet. The helmet design was, from the original artwork, was somewhat revised and tweaked into this design, which is somewhat reminiscent of Mark VI. So it's become like an evolutionary step between on the road to Mark VI and even Mark VII as well. So there's some nice design cues there. We have a complete redesign of the backpack. So the backpack is actually more familiar as a later Mark VII backpack, and it does indeed, essentially the Mark IV backpack is basically the Mark VII backpack. There will be a different design again for Marks 5 and 6. Not all armour, not all suits have it, but some of them have these molecular bonding studs, which is a slightly different style of armour that was used in it. And then these guys have got rotor cannons. They're very cool looking rotor cannons. They might not be the hardest hitting weapon in the Horus Heresy game, far from it, but they certainly look really good. And they've got the kit for the rotor cannon has a weapon, the ammunition feed, and then this ammo hopper, which attaches onto the backpack. There's also an alternate design of the rotor cannon available as well. So let's have a look at another model, and I'll talk a bit about building. So tips, hints for building. I mean, these are pretty straightforward to build. These are the redesigned weapons, so the hand is attached to the actual weapon, unlike previously where the hand was attached to the arm and then you slotted it into an attachment point on the weapon. Now that change does actually make these a bit trickier to assemble, and what I did on these was, after several false starts on my doing my Mark V's, I actually decided to do a small pin on all these hands into the forearms. I mean, it does make the final model stronger, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to assemble, so that's something that's worth considering if you're building these guys. In terms of assembling the rotor cannons, I did the following. I attached the ammo feed to the rotor cannon, and I attached the ammo hopper to the ammo feed, and I also attached the ammo feed to the backpack, so that was all assembled. And then that was all assembled. Actually, what I did was I did the pose, I built this bit, and then I stuck this on here, so then it was all kind of sticking out because these start off straight. I then heated it up and just bent it round and stuck it into position. So I did that in one bend, and by having the backpack, ammo hopper, feed and rotor cannon all assembled, it just made doing that much easier. And that's a technique you can apply to a whole host of these heavy weapon and special weapon troopers that have ammo or power feeds attaching to a backpack. Let's have a look at another model. In this set, you get a mixture of kind of unstudded and studded parts. I mean, I've left all the studs on, all these molecular bonding studs as they came. You could very easily remove them if you didn't like them. But they add a bit of character to the squad, and when they're painted, it gives a bit more something to detail as well. The shoulder pads have got a new design. As in the rest of the armour, it's much cleaner, but it now has a rim around it as well. And this, in the same way the backpack is reminiscent of Mark 7 armour, or a precursor to Mark 7 armour, so are these shoulder pads. And we would see a change of design again in Marks 5 and 6, but then Mark 7 finally returns to this design, which is another interesting bit of stylistic evolution. Another characteristic of the Mark 4 armour was the noting that it had much more efficient and more compact power cabling. And you can indeed see this with this sort of chest cross design here, and if you compare the amount of cabling on these guys to the Marks 2 and 3, it does look a lot more refined. These are all multi-part models, so they're very posable, which is good. You get a lot of different poses for the models, and then coupled with the fact they're resin miniatures, so they can heat them up and rebend the poses as well, that just adds to the flexibility. With this guy, I use a technique of drilling a pin, an oblique pin, into the foot, bending a hook around on the bottom, snipping it off, and then packing it in with some milliput to create a secure attachment point to give it strength, because it only has one foot in contact with the base. This model here shows a variant design helmet, and this helmet here has very strong design precursor cues to a Mark 7 helmet. So it's interesting to see these design features hopping or dropping into these guys. Another thing with helmets, if we just go back and look at a couple of others, there's two different, here we go, this guy and this guy, there's two different styles of vents. So the guy on the left first, you can see he's got these almost like horizontal vents, or vents parallel, shall I say, to the crest of the helm, whereas this guy's a perpendicular. So yeah, you do get that variety as well. And then you also have double cabling coming around to the front respirator and single cabling there. So although this is one set of miniatures, the sculptors have got quite an amount of design variation into the models. So there you go. That is Mark IV Maximus Armour. Very different and sleek looking Space Marine armour mark, and a design that is now very closely associated with the era of the Horus Heresy. And indeed, just as this armour was starting to become nearly fully equipped across the legions, it basically got abandoned as the main mark of armour due to the circumstances of the heresy. And in the next video, we'll look at the stopgap solution that came along to take its place. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found that interesting. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.